Howdy, and welcome everyone to another episode of the Polynesian Eyes podcast. We're very excited to be here from South Central Texas. We have Mr. Aotearoa out in New Zealand, and then a very special guest joining us today, Siaosi Ilaiu. There's some comments. I have been really kind of pondering. I'm a believer that shifts in paradigm and politics and power, there's always a reason, right? There's these things do not happen by accident, kind of like what you're saying, Siaosi. And I have always wondered many times. Let's take into account. Let's just go through the three paradigm shifts, right? You have Kaulfonua Fekai. His father is assassinated, and it sounds like his grandfather. This has happened for unusual, right? Unusual for the Tu'i Tonga, which is traditionally a very stable system. There's a series of assassinations, including his father, and then all of a sudden, a new idea emerges. And what's the new idea? Tu'i Takalaua. So as you just pay attention, it seems like that was his answer to stabilize for whatever reason, right? With the series of instability and assassinations happening in the Tu'i Tonga line, his solution is, I'm going to establish a new kingly line. And then what does he do? He leaves Tonga. From all indications, he goes to Samoa, and the Tu'i Tonga resides in Samoa for like what, 5-6 generations?
5 generations from what I
yes.
understand.
Yeah.
And I do believe in your kind of approach to this, Siaosi, because it is not a hostile takeover, and there's many reasons to explain this. One of it is, and you mention it in your thesis paper, the idea of the Tu'i Kanokupolu, Kauhalalalo, and Kauhalauta, and the Fonua Tanu. This is, to me, why it's not a hostile takeover, because the Tu'i Tonga, when you have a hostile takeover, you take over your quote unquote, the person you assume power over, you take over their land and their rights. When the Tu'i Takalaua gets instituted, he doesn't take over the Tu'i Tonga's lands, where all the langis are built, right? Where all the langis are built in La Paja, the Tu'i Takalaua does not inherit or take over that, even though the Tu'i Tonga has moved his residence to Samoa. What does the Tu'i Takalaua do? He creates land. That's where that whole Fonua Tanu comes in, about 100 acres, because there was a island. Yes, Fonua Motu. That's where the Tu'i Takalaua lived. They started by building a road that connected to the island, and then they developed over 100 acres. So you don't go create new land if you've conquered and challenged your brother, right? And taken over. He's basically saying, I can't take over the La Paja area. I have to create my own land. And he governs in that sense. And so that's one thing. To me, that was the Tu'i Tonga solution. I don't know if it was, there's a couple ideas you can think of just right off the bat. By dividing the power, there's less reasons for someone to assassinate you or to attack you, right? If I'm able to maintain, quote unquote, the Eiki part of the Tu'i Tonga and separate it from the political portion, that division of power in theory would create a little bit more stability. And he duplicates it, and it seems like an internal family solution. Two brothers will split the power. I'm going to go to Samoa. I'm probably not going to get killed. Some ideas are he starts a military campaign. Around this time, you see all the Kolotau in
Futuna,
Uvea, also the Pulemele, some people say at the same time in Samoa. And then, for whatever reason, there's another shift with the Tu'i Takalaua to the Tu'i Kanokupolu. And I actually, it's funny, when I was listening to your paper, some of the things that I've been thinking about is aligns with it. And I'm just explaining these things, Siaosi, and then you can kind of put your what you think is incorrect or you think differently, and same thing with Masi. The Tu'i Takalaua is gaining in political power, but he's always hemorrhaged by one thing. And what's that one thing? The blood, right? So you mention it in your paper that the Tu'i Takalaua always ends up having a marriage into the Tu'i Tonga. And so it is an attempt to legitimize that second line. So in theory, you're handicapped as a Tu'i Takalaua because you have to rely on drawing that blood connection to the Tu'i Tonga to maintain your legitimacy, because you can't say, I'm a direct descendant, inheritor of Aho Etu, therefore I have some of these unique qualities. I'm wondering if, and then the third system comes with a whole approach that doesn't require any blood tie. This third system is purely on your prowess, your ability to lead people, your ability to convince people. It to me, in a Game of Thrones kind of mentality, if we just kind of look at overall strategy, and then it's a father and a son, right? That the Tu'i Takalaua to the Tu'i Kanokupolu, it almost seems like, you know what? I can create a third line that will not be handicapped by what this line has. I have the Tu'i Takalaua, but I'm handicapped because I don't inherit the Eiki side from the Tu'i Tonga. I have to remarry into that line. I'm creating this third line that in theory is independent. It doesn't rely on that connection to the Tu'i Tonga, and it can purely harness political and military power. I don't know. That's just me thinking out loud as to why would these, because these are smart people, right? Politics and government and religion, they've been generations of people thinking this way. You don't just go set up new systems for no reason. But yeah, that's just some of my thoughts there. I wanted to my question is, with that context, Siaosi, my question is, what caused, from your research and your experience, the paradigm shifts from, like you mentioned, from A to B to C, which is Tu'i Tonga, Tu'i Takalaua, to the Tu'i Kanokupolu. Any context or something from your end that explains the paradigm shifts?
Yeah, I'm glad that what you said is very sound, but there is another issue. Maybe it wasn't clear from me in my thesis, but I will bring it forth here. The issue of Tu'i Takalaua. When Kaulfonua Fekai departed for Samoa, Mo'unga Motu'a, in my view, and his descendants were not Tu'i Takalaua, they were Hau. And when I was in Uvea, Futuna, and other islands, they refer to Mo'unga Motu'a as Hatakalaua, but a Hau. It's not a Tu'i Takalaua. But when I study the line from Mo'unga Motu'a, I think to Tanaki Tonga, to Waimatoka, to Siulangapo, Wakalahi Mohe Uri. They were house of Tonga. They were not Tu'i Takalaua. When it comes to Mo'unga Tonga, Tapu Osi came back from Samoa. He came back, and there was no resistance in Tonga from the Hau line. They offer him his place in Lapaha to continue with Tu'i Tonga. But Mo'unga Tonga, I think it's Neil Canson who claimed from his informants that Manu'a Tonga demanded some kind of dignity for their service. So Tapu Osi elevated Manu'a Tonga to be a sacred ruler like himself. That's when Manu'a Tonga devolved the Hau authority to his son Ngata. I think if we can understand that transition, that the Tu'i Takalaua was started from Manu'a Tonga, not from Manu'a Motua, then there will be a better perspective of looking at the paradigm shift in Tonga. The fact that Kaulfonua Fekai became the Tu'i Manua of Samoa is something that is absent in the history of Tonga. Takalaua married the Tu'i Manua Fifine from Ta'u Island, because in Manua they have 3 islands: Ta'u, Olosenga, and Ofu. They take turns in becoming Tu'i Manua, but half of the Tu'i Manua were females, and one of them married Takalaua, and that's Kaulfonua Fekai's mother. And after the assassination of Takalaua, Kaulfonua Fekai decided to take over the Tu'i Manua title, so that he asked his brother to look after the dominion of the Tu'i Tonga. Like Tua was talking about, he built his own base, but never touched the territory of the Tu'i Tonga, because he doesn't have the authority. The authority is still with the Tu'i Tonga in Manu'a. And if we go back to the Samoan history, when Kaulfonua Fekai became Tu'i Manua in Samoa, that's when Upolu, Savai'i, and Tutu'ila reacted to look for their own new authority, but not realizing that Kaulfonua Fekai's daughter married a high chief, Tamalelangi of Samoa, and their daughter became the first Tawhaiwha of Samoa, still the offspring of the Tu'i Manua. But the Tu'i Manua was Kaulfonua Fekai. So I presented a paper on that, and Samoans were skeptical of the points that I made, but they look at the history and they found out it was true. See? Why they reacted to the Tu'i Manua and disregarded his authority? Because he is a Tu'i Tonga who became Tu'i Manua at the time. See? But coming back to Tonga, when Manu'a Tonga became sacred, that's the downfall of that line. When the Manu'a Motua's line was how they were successful in expanding the authorities to other islands and so as to the rest of the empire, saving saving the Tu'i Tonga, because the Tu'i Tonga was never lapse. It moved for 200 years or more and then come back. But the thing that gave me the idea about those paradigm shift assassinations that the Tuala was mentioned before, there was something, of course. When I look back at Talakaifaiki and his failure in Samoa, I found out one thing. It is clear that the worship of Talakaifaiki was erased. Talakaifaiki and Talafapite they adopted a new god, which was Hikuleo, in my view. And that's when you started to see the Uvea name in the succession of the Tu'i Tonga at the time. There was a Haweaua was the one that was made later. There is the other Havea before him. I think what happened there was a religious revolution. Those who I think the priest who saved Takalaua didn't like the idea of Hikuleo replacing as the god for the Tu'i Tonga. And I look at it critically too, because from then on until the 1920s, the information Western scholars received from their from the people they interviewed, they only mentioned Hikuleo, not Takalaua, and it's something debatable. But when I look at the failure of Talakaifaiki and the appearance of Uvea in his descendants, then it's likely that the very thing that caused the demise of the Tu'i Tonga was a religious revolution, because they don't Talakaifaiki despise the authority of Tangaloa for his failure and seeking a new god to to bring back power to his line. But that's my theory.
Mm.
And that's for me the cause for assassinations of those Tu'i Tonga. But one thing I learned from other islands is that Lomi Aitupua, Tu'i Tonga Lomi Aitupua, he married a daughter of a Tu'i Uvea in the line of greed there. And their son was Haweaua. And then Lomi Aitupua married this Manu'a lady, and they have Takalaua. But because Haweaua went back to Uvea, he built a kalia and fetched stones and come back and built a langi for Lomi Aitupua. That action made Lomi Aitupua favor Haweaua as the successor, and he became the next Tu'i Tonga instead of Takalaua, because Takalaua's mother was the principal wife, not the Uvea lady. But it's documented well in Uvea how they help Haweaua as a son of the Uvea queen to the Tu'i Tonga.
Mm.
But because Haweaua became Tu'i Tonga first, the assassination of Haweaua was instigated from the side of Takalaua, even though the genealogy says that Takalaua was a son of Haweaua. The information from Uvea says no, they were brothers, and that's why the Uvea people assassinated Takalaua
And that's why
after
they
they
chased him
assassinated
all the way to
Haweaua.
Uvea.
See? When
Okay.
Haweaua was assassinated, there were rebellion behind the scene, and finally Tamasia and Malo Fafa from Hihipo in Uvea decided to make a Takalaua as avenging. Yeah.
Mm.
So it's revealing, most revealing sometimes when you take stories from other islands that explain some something that seems so insignificant in our own story, but it has a very loud voice out outside of Tonga, especially the story of Kaufunofikai is Tu'i Manua. The Samoans tried to bury it, but it said so in their tradition. See, Waitoifanga was his daughter, was sent to Upolu to marry Tamalelangi. And by that time, Upolu, Savai, and Tutuila and Manono, they decided to have nothing to do with the Tu'i Manua, not knowing that the issue from Waitoifanga and Tamalelangi will become the ruler they were looking for, because they tried to discredit the Tu'i Manua because he's a Tongan, and they ended up with his own granddaughter to Samoa. It's only Tupu Samoa. And of course, we can always have questions, but I think it's sometimes we need to talk more about a small area, like what Tualau mentioned. It is very sound argument, and without looking at other issues that could be involved to highlight its true meaning. Of course, from me, I call it true meaning. We still uh, miss the boat if we don't uh, pick a particular area to clear up, and especially to allow the Tu'i Takalaua argument. I argue that Maunga Motua was not a Tu'i Takalaua down to Wakalahi Moeuli. Maunga Tonga was the one that was sanctified as divine king. But that is only downfall because divine king in Tonga only have one place, not two. And Tu'i Tonga was the only one that the rest recognized. Maunga Tonga, 2 generations later, defunct. See?
Yeah.
Because he cannot fit into that category. But that's something to think about. I'm not saying something to be true. No, I'm adding into the dialogue, and we can talk about it.
Yes.
And maybe if I make myself more convincing next time about that area, or maybe somebody else will add some more to it. But it's the soup is better to stay all the time.
Yes.
the cream.
No,
Yeah,
100%.
I think that's
100%.
the only thing that I generally add, because
Yeah.
going to details sometimes uh, find us in a wrong path. But I determined this time to concentrate on the Tu'i Takalaua and issues behind the assassinations of those Tu'i Tonga. But yeah,
Hmm.
of course, you
Yeah,
feel
there's
free to
th-
disagree, and
Hmm.
we
no,
all
there's
are students of this little
Yes.
history of our country, and
Yeah.
I'm still looking. I'm still looking for answers now, and
Yeah. Well, that's why we're
yeah,
here. That's why we're here. It's good to
yes.
have these discussions. Yeah.
No, 100%. There's a couple things I wanted to add. And maybe, like you said, I like the idea. We throw the ideas in. I mean, I have some ideas listening to what you're bringing. I find it very intriguing, the story of Uvea and Takalaua, because we're relatively familiar with Telea or Urakimata. There's a
Hmm.
very similar story between that situation, right? There were two brothers. Their father was Tapuosi. Their mothers were
yeah,
sisters, right? Which is Telea and Lomueki. Well, he eventually became Lomueki, but it wasn't Mongaone, I think was his name. Sorry, not the greatest with names. But basically, when Tapuosi comes back to Tongatapu, he sends out,
yeah,
that's where the term Urakimata comes from, right? He says, to his two sons. They're both firstborn, so they're both eligible to be the Tu'i Tonga. He says, "Ko iwaki matape
Yeah.
te usiu giai." That's gonna be the Tu'i Tonga. And obviously, Telea shows up first, so he becomes the Tu'i Tonga, and Lomueki shows up second. And so, even though he's older than Telea, but Telea becomes the Tu'i Tonga. So I can see that story that you're talking about with the Uvea queen.
Mm.
As long as Havea is the firstborn, right?
Mm.
From there, and with father being the Tu'i Tonga, he's eligible to be the Tu'i Tonga, because it's not the first time that or the last time that happens. The other thing that I find interesting, and I'm hearing this for the first time, that
Yeah.
the possibility that a Tu'iha Takalaua is elevated
Yeah.
per se into a more achy position. But I find it very interesting because we've asked this question in the past, Masi.
Yeah.
What does Telea do
Yeah.
when he becomes the Tu'i Tonga? He builds his langi on the Ha'atakalaua land,
For
where
Nuatan.
he's on Fonuatanu, where he's basically trying to reinforce. And maybe it's because his father elevates the Tu'i Takalaua, but when he becomes Tu'i Tonga, he wants to just remind the Tu'i Takalaua, yes, my father has elevated you, but I'm the Tu'i Tonga, and I'm not only going to build the biggest langi, right? I'm going to build it on quote unquote your land, just to remind you that the Tu'i Tonga is still above you, because that was something that was a little strange. And I asked my father that question. He's like, dude, why is it Tapu Osi builds Malomaloa'a on his side, right? In Talasiu, that's where the Tu'i
Kahala
Tonga
Uta.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the
Yeah.
Kahuala Uta side. But then when Telea shows up, he immediately goes and builds on the Tu'iha Takalaua side. And my dad said,
Kahala
well, sorry, on the Kawahalalo side. And my dad says, yes, because the Tu'i Tonga can do whatever he wants. And it seems like it could have been an open statement to everyone on Tonga Tapu in the scenario that the Tu'iha Takalaua has been elevated, but Telea wants to remind the Tu'iha Takalaua, yes, you may be elevated by my father, but I still decide what happens on Tonga Tapu. So kind of interesting. I thought I'd just throw that in there. Any thoughts on that, Masi?
No. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. I don't know if Siaosi has anything to add
No,
on. Other, yeah.
I agree. I agree on that point, because uh, that's immediately after the elevation of Maunga Tonga as sacred Tu'iha Takalaua. See, I think Telea said to himself, "I will draw the line and remind the Tu'iha Takalaua if they want to be equal." And because Maunga Tonga was so persistent on seeking any any kind of status for their service. See, saying, "Hey, you left Tonga for 200 years, and we look after your land for you, and you just march in and become Tu'i Tonga again. How about us?" But that was his mistake. According to me, that was his mistake in trying to seeking some kind of compensation for their service, and willing to become sacred himself. And if we look at it, for him to give away the how authority to his son, if he was just created as a sacred king, and he have to remove the secular authority to his son, it makes sense to me, because he wanted to be fully sacred like the Tu'i Tonga. And I think the Bible would say that just accept who you are. Don't want to become the same as your superior. But
Yeah,
that's what happened to
don't
Maunga
covet your
Tonga.
neighbor's
See?
power.
but that's I agree with what Tualau said about drawing the line. You know. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice,
I,
nice.
I think if we ever have another podcast, we can uh, decide on a special dimension, a special paradigm, and we can clear up things there
Mm.
more in detail. But that's only a suggestion.
No, that would
Mm,
be great.
mm.
100%.
Yeah.
Um, anything else, Masi?
No, I was just gonna think Tua, because I know one of our viewers kind of mentioned what Siaosi Ilaiu
Yeah.
kind of mentioned with the Tu'i Manua being a title, and that makes sense that the Tu'i Tonga title was with Kalufonua, that he held simultaneously the Tu'i Manua. That can probably explain that theory of why Manua was kind of untouched, and then the Tu'i Tonga at that time, Kalufonua, was just kind of hopping around between Tutuila, Upolu, Savai, and all the other islands, kind of thing. Because that was kind of one of the ideas. Because we were thinking of things it could have been a Tu'i Manua, could have been maybe a younger brother of, or an older brother of a Tu'i Tonga that didn't get a Tu'i Tonga line, that kind of dwelled in Manua. But I don't know. That's what I was just
Mm.
thinking out loud on that, Shashi, when you kind of mentioned, because we had some viewers think about that. But I want to go back on the Shashi Ilaiu, on the burial mounds with the because they're everywhere in Mu'a, from the Tu'i Tonga with the
Yeah.
Langi and the Tu'i Takalaua, the Fare. They were known to be buried there, and then even now the Tu'i Kanokupolu, which is the Mala'i Kula, or Mala'i, where the Tu'i Kanokupolus were buried.
Mm.
I have a question on the house. So when how you said, like,
Yeah.
when the Tu'i Tonga left, right? He left.
Mm.
You said, you're kind of estimating the Tu'i Hatalawa was mostly started with Mo'unga Tonga, and then I was just thinking, what happened? So if you were a how, are you because you're kind of, even though you had an important responsibility, were you
Mm.
distinguished to have a buried? Are you just buried like everybody else, or were you because you didn't fit, because it was only Tu'i Tonga, Tu'i Hatalawa title holders, and the Tuigon Polo were buried in their
Mm.
distinguished, because they were distinguished, because those were the top titles. So I'm just having a question on what you think. Hows were just buried, just like everybody else, kind of thing,
Yes.
or
Yes.
were they kind of distinguished? Because I'm just thinking out loud, just in that area. But yeah, for how people, for the house,
Yeah.
in that.
Yeah. That's why I strongly believe that Mo'unga Motu'a was just a supervisor, just a
Okay.
how. Because if Kaufonofekai made him a king, a Tu'i Hatakalaua, they would have had a burial place for themselves, distinguished themselves as kingly line. But because Maunga Tonga later, uh, hoping to become a sacred king, in a small period of time, it wasn't sink into the system to develop some kind of uh, uh, distinguishing feature that allowed any change to build his own place and have his own burial place. Because only two generations from there, the Tu'i Takalaua were no longer in service. And yeah, the how uh, I heard that the only place where they were buried uh, uh, is Loa Manu, or a place like that. Maybe you too familiar with the uh, burial place in Tatamotonga or Kauhalalalo. But that's the only. It was not a langi, because Tu'i Hatakalaua were never buried in a langi.
Hmm.
So that's what I know, and and I think they only have what 4 Tu'i Talakaifaiki, and that was it after Manu'a Tonga. So they were not so significant for to have their own court, to bring their own people to build something like the court of the Tu'i Tonga in Kavalauta. So in a small period of time, we are talking here about 1500s. So at the time, the Tu'i Tonga was still the main player. The Tu'i Takalaua, so to speak, became a sacred ruler. But I think it wasn't recognized widely, even in the empire. The empire at the time recognized Ahau. They recognized Maunga Motua in Uvea and Futuna for building all those forts. And they, yeah, according to Uvea, they brought people from Hihifo with a lady who was a leader, and that's how they divided Hihifo and Hahake and in Uvea after the Tu'i Tonga. When Maunga Motua came with his people, they divided up Uvea into 3 main districts, but not as a Tu'i Takalaua. And of course, I cannot take the version literally, but I have to examine the process that would lead up to any if Maunga Motua show himself as or presented himself as a monarch or just uh, second in command for the Tu'i Tonga. And it seemed to
Yeah.
me from the Uvea version that he was the second in command
Command. Yeah.
of the
Okay.
Tu'i Tonga.
No, 100%. And I think a lot of the
But yeah,
conversations I've had
see,
with people.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead. Oh, no, sorry. I think there's a slight delay. So I
no,
apologize for that. I think from a lot of people that I've had conversations with, there is highly recognized that the Tu'i Takalaua from the very beginning was always a secondary title to the Tu'i Tonga. It was never ever thought as an equal or above, right? That's been a lot of the conversations I've had. And there's actually multiple fares on the
Fonuatanu.
Fonuatanu that there's multiples in there. Like we have
Bunch of
there yeah, some of our relatives that come from both the Tu'i Tonga and the Tu'i Takalaua, some of them chose to be on the Tu'i Takalaua burial.
Yeah.
They didn't choose to go, and even though they had the right to do so. So there are some interesting, let's just call it family dynamics, right? Where it's like for whatever reason, some people felt a little more loyal or connected to the Tu'i Takalaua rather than to the Tu'i Tonga side. Maybe that's why Tapu Osi decided it's time to go back to Tonga Tapu. Maybe there was, because on Tonga Tapu, from what we understand, the Tu'i Takalaua oversaw the Inasi, but the Polo Polo was oversaw by the Tu'i Tonga. And the Inasi is not as sacred as the Polo Polo, right? The Polo Polo is the first fruits, which is a lot more religious in nature. It's a lot more headed towards the Eiki nature of the Tu'i Tonga. Like that was something that was, if we could, maybe one way to look at it is the Tu'i Takalaua was purely for administrative purposes. Tu'i Tonga was separated as mostly religious, and that's how you see the two major gatherings in the empire were split. The Tu'i Tonga would come back to Tonga Tapu for the Polo Polo, but he would not come back necessarily for the Inasi. The a lot of the oral history that we're familiar with is the Tu'i Takalaua managed the Inasi. That was
Yeah.
the one that he managed, but the Polo Polo
The Tu'i
was
Tonga always came back.
the Tu'i Tonga was the one because that was a religious practice and given to the Tu'i Tonga because he was seen as a representative of Hikureo from our perspective of Hikureo, and that's why he was given that. And
Hmm.
that so there's some interesting things there. There's I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 pares on the Fonuatanu where the Tu'i Takalaua and their descendants are buried throughout Fonuatanu, and it's all on
Yeah.
the Fonuatanu side.
Yeah.
So that was just something to add to that. What I wanted to kind of ask a little bit of a question. What is I'm really fascinated with Uvea and Futuna and kind of their perspective. We talk a lot about our relationship with Samoa and with Fiji and some of these other islands,
Yeah.
but we don't get a lot of perspective on what is Uvea and Futuna's perspective when they look back to Tonga, and how close do they feel like there's a close connection to Tonga, and what's their perspective of
Yeah.
that relationship?
Yeah. They both believe that they were originally Tongans. Futuna story, the because Futuna is an island that is divided into two now, but according to the kingly line of Futuna, which is the Hau of Alo. Alo is in the north, and the south is Singave. The
Mm,
Hau of Alo, Satula, he was one of my informant. He said to me that later migration from Samoa uh, inhabited the south side, and he mockingly saying, "Look at us here in Alo. We are tall and we are strong, and we are beautiful. Look at those in Singave. They are short and fat and ugly because they are Samoans." See? And he said, originally we were just Tongans living in here. Yeah.
that's funny.
But for the Uvea tradition, they they believe that they were Tongans originally, and Waitupu in Tuvalu, they claim that they were Tongans originally, and the Tui Folaha, according to them, came
Mm,
from Waitupu uh, in, uh, in Tuvalu. They said since Tui Folaha was elected to become one of the Tu'i Tonga Wharewa, he never returned, but they worship him as though as he is a god. And they have a little shrine of Tui Folaha there. See?
mm,
So we have a wider view now of the geographical origin of the Wharewas. Now that the Tui Folaha can be identified, that comes from that's he was the he is still the deity that they worship in their traditional way. It's like the Tui Lakepa title in Tumbo. When the what's his name married the daughter of the Tu'i Tonga, and he left Lakemba to Tonga. They no longer installed the title. So Tui Lakepa became a spirit deity, and
mm.
like what
Tui
what
Folaha.
the Tuvaluans say of Tui Folaha. Yeah. So we know that Tui Manave came from Tutuila, but that was a replacement of the other Wharewas. But I never know where Matakehi come from, but I know where Tui Folaha comes from Tuvalu. Right? But they speak of
Okay.
Tonga as but smaller islands like Anuta, Kapingamarangi, Ontong Java, and even the Solomon Islands and uh, parts of Melanesia.
Vanuatu.
They
Oh,
speak of the Tu'i Tonga as their ruler, Vanuatu. Yeah,
Mm.
see,
And have you
they
spoken
never.
with these people?
One thing that they never. Yeah, I initially we talk. They speak their own language. I talk in Tongan. We basically know each other. And after 3 or 5 days, you don't realize that you have been uh, absorbed into conversing in their own language, like in
Hmm.
Uvea especially. I speak in Tongan.
mm,
I don't change a thing. They speak Uvean to me. I think after 1 week, we talk and my cousin there, Muriki Hamea, he was the one who sponsored me to come over to Uvea. He said to me, "Do you realize something?" And I said, "No." He said, "You are speaking Uvean. You no longer speaking Tongan to me. You're speaking in our language." You see? Yeah,
Very interesting.
and that's an interesting thing. Muriki Hamea was a descendant of a chief from Tonga. Because when Ngongo went to Uvea to try to expand his own influence, and he was murdered by the Uvean for his mischief, he raped the queen of Uvea, Amelia Tokangahau.
mm.
So two canoes come to Tonga, but Taupaha was the one with power to apologize for what happened to Ngongo. And when after telling him the story, the Taupaha says, no, there's nothing to be forgiven here. Manu'a was wrong. I never uh, advised him to go and look for to try to Christianize Uvea. But the thing is, I will send a Tongan chief to marry the queen of Uvea because in such situation like that, when a lady was raped of that status, she cannot marry because she has been violated.
Yeah.
So King George uh, came to Tatamotonga and he got Unga Papalangi sent over to marry Amelia Tokangahau of Uvea. And their son was Muriki Hamea, and their grandson was Leone. He became Hau of Uvea in his turn. You know,
Hmm.
they rotate like Manu'a. Tulitea, Takumasiva, and Vehikite. Vehiika. That's the free kingly line there. But when they turn around to the Takmasiva turn, it was Leone who became Hau, the grandson of Unga Papalangi. And from Leone to Murikihamea, that's his grandfather. See,
Hmm.
they see how Tongans married to to a level in other uh, satellite colonies. They
Yes.
Yeah,
always go right at the top,
yeah,
and they became prominent in their own right
yeah.
over there. And lucky for me, at the time you needed to have visa to enter Uvea. See, but because this one here was in Parliament, so he can sponsor me without a visa. But I
Hmm.
remember King George the fifth, he had a problem with visa before. See, but when I went there, it's just
Sponsor.
sponsorship.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's interesting that you mentioned that, and that's it from our understanding with that practice, Siaosi, that's a very very old practice. The
Mm,
term, correct me if I'm wrong, Masi is referred to as tokatufa.
yeah.
Is that
Oh,
practice? Is that practice of intermarrying and sending descendants or relatives of the Tu'i Tonga. But for specific families, the Tu'i Tonga would have children with multiple people, and that's how
Mm.
you maintain that
maintain.
relationship, because it's that achy blood, right? And that's the relationship that
Mm.
transcends, oh, I'm looking for political power, I'm looking for military power. No, this is a
Mm,
family situation where we're all family, we're all cousins,
Yes.
and so you're much more likely to maintain that relationship over long distances, over long periods of time, because
yeah.
it's family. And that's,
Mhm.
somewhat similar to what we see in monarchs throughout Europe, where alliances were made through marriage and those relationships maintained. So it seems to be a human strategy to maintain relationships over time.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted to add or
Yeah.
ask, Masi? Anything else?
No, no. I was just thinking. Oh, I was gonna ask just another question. Siaosi Ilaiu, just a question on language, right? Because
Yep.
I feel like I feel like back in the days, just reading the accounts of especially George Vason, Mariner. Mariner was like in
Mhm.
the time he was in Tonga, about the late 1800s. It was, and then even when he wrote in accounts of Hawaiians being coming to Tonga, they were just speaking naturally with the
Yeah.
Tongans in Tonga.
Mm.
There was no like even a mishap or a gap or anything, just the communication, right? And
Mm.
then even with the Uvea people, Samoa too, it was I feel like, and that's why we're a big proponent of the Tongan Empire, the Polynesian nation, because we were
Mm.
communicating relatively easy. And I'm thinking maybe it was during the time of missionary coming in and then the country being split up, and then they're saying speak this way because this is how we hear it and interpret it this way, and they written it down, and then through that institutionalized education with what they hear is supposed to be spoken that way. And then that's how it's kind of,
Mm.
that's how the language has evolved to today, where us communicating as we normally did back in the late 1700s, even up to the early 1800s, it was it
Mm.
was pretty natural. And I'm just asking, what are your thoughts with the language wise, with throughout the whole Pacific? And I'm not talking about I'm talking about the whole empire wise, because from the accounts I see from Mariner, George Vason, when the Ha'amoas would come over and they kind of do their festivities, or there was a marriage being happening, they have festivities, they said there was a little change, like you can tell it's a different, it's almost like it's almost like when American English and European English, right? But you still understand each other, but it's not as different as
Mm.
it is today, because they still understood each other. I don't know, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, just when do you think that the language has always been like this, kind of not really understand each other, they just had maybe certain interpreters back in those days? Or are you more of the same thought of it really did change to how it's kind of different now with the whole, when the Pacific Empire was eroding, and then there's becoming boundaries, and European countries are colonizing the rest of our Pacific Island neighbors and stuff. But that's just my thought on there. I'm a big believer on that. I don't know what you think on that.
Yeah. I believe that there will always be distinctive basics in every language. Uh, but during those times, communication was not like now. Uh, our boats, our careers were busy everywhere around the Pacific. And I
Yeah.
believe that Tongans we're multilingual also, plus the uh, the the ubiquitous contact between high level families. We are not a yearly thing, it was a monthly thing. Because I heard stories in Aana that preparing for a wedding there, it needs supplies from Tonga. It only take 1 week for 3 boats to come there and then back again. See,
Hmm.
So language is not a big problem for people to understand in those days. But I can refer back to the linguistic uh, chart of Pacific languages, and that's why I still believe that they are distinctive uh, elements of Eastern Polynesia and from Western Polynesia. For example, the Australasian languages, you have the Tongic languages and the Proto-Central Polynesian languages. And according to those researchers in the 1920s, uh, the, there are only two nations, Tonga and Niue, speak the same language. They speak the Tongic languages. But the Proto-Central, they have the Proto-Marquesic and the Proto-Eastern. And Samoa and those, according to them, they split down from that Proto-Central to the Proto-Eastern. So to answer your question, Thomas, yes, there still be distinctive uh, languages. Like Samoan is not quite the same with the Tongans because sometime in the past, isolations between those island groups happened, and then communications later they have differences, and that's why we find Eastern Polynesian languages is a bit different from the Western uh, Polynesian languages. But I think it wasn't too hard to understand each other, like what Rachel and Marina mentioned. Uh, for example, in Niue, after the contact with Europe, there was no Bible with the Niuean language, printed in the Niuean language. The only Bible they have was Samoan, so they have to speak Samoan in order for them to read the Bible.
Understand. Yeah.
And yeah, so therefore, Niuean language is a bit off from our Tongan language now, even though we are the main one speaking the Tongic languages. See, and there are technical stuff to make uh, uh, languages in Polynesia more distinct than what we have in the past. I hope I answer your question, but
No,
that's
no, no.
all I can come up with.
No, that's yeah. It's a good. I just want to hear your thoughts on it because it's a good conversation to have. So, but yeah, unless you have anything else, Tua,
Yeah, I have
any other
another question because listening to, and I really appreciate you sharing what you're observing in, like, as far as Tuvalu and Uvea and Futuna, and also in Ha'amo, because we start to see a pattern, certain patterns, right? One that stuck out to me, or well, of a couple of them, you reaffirm the Tokatufa history, right, of intermarriage throughout the islands to maintain those relationships, and to establish leadership in the outer islands throughout the empire. The other one was interesting to me was you mentioned the rotating of titles through a group of islands. You mentioned that
Yeah.
in Ha'amoa they have that, in Uvea they have that. Are there other areas that you're aware of throughout Polynesia of certain patterns like that? As you've talked to people, seems like you've had a lot of conversations and direct conversations with people
Mm.
about some of their cultural and historical oral history about their ties to Tonga, but any other patterns you've seen in how they're structured politically and socially throughout Polynesia and the Pacific. I'm kind of interested to see if there's anything else that you found that was kind of interesting to say, hey, these guys are doing the same thing or believe the same thing as those guys that surprised you as you did your research.
Yes, it is. The Tongan case was so unique in a way because Tonga was so politically centralized. The other islands, like for example Samoa, it was a fragmented society right from the beginning, and
Mm.
so to have a single authority there was so impossible. That's why they claim that they were under the Tu'i Manua and then the Tu'i Tonga, but they never had their own monarch. But the strange thing is, Tonga was centralized and Manua supposed to be centralized also, but they have three lines who interchange or rotating, holding the kingship authority,
Very
kingship
interesting.
title. The
Mm.
same thing in Uvea, rotating through a free kingly line, and Tahiti also. And I
Mm.
believe that maybe in
Hmm.
Hawaii, but because Hawaii was centralized later during the Kamehameha era, but it
Yes.
was a very divided nation
Yeah.
before Kamehameha. They have the Maui have their own chiefdom, Hawaii, the main island. Kamehameha centralized it, the whole group later, and it became like the time of King George in Tonga. But Tonga was centralized right from the Tu'i Tonga line from the beginning,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and that's the
Yeah.
unique part about our Tongan history, because
Hmm.
none of the other Polynesian islands were centralized like Tonga. See?
Well,
Hmm.
and that's something that to me is, I don't think things
Yeah, but
like that, when you see a pattern like that, I don't think that
Mm.
happens by accident, right? I firmly believe this, that if you see a pattern, then it's by design.
no.
And one could make the argument or take the position, how come one little area is centralized and everywhere else it's decentralized?
Yeah.
I
Revolving
think
door.
that's by design. And I think those who understand political power and structure, you centralize where you're quote unquote headquartered. And what do? You decentralize everywhere else to maintain that unification.
Mm.
Because I'm
Mhm.
learning this in my current. It's funny how I learning this in my current role in my company. Very valuable things to understand when power and influence is being consolidated. That's a red flag, right? Those are things you
Mm.
need to keep your pulse on, and that's one of the things that on this program we regularly revisit
Mm.
the miraculous fact that Tonga maintained independence. It's not by chance, because you look everywhere else in the world, it didn't happen in many places, but why here? And when you pay attention, it is because there's an understanding of, is power being consolidated or decentralized? And every time that power was being decentralized from Tonga, Tupou the first and the leadership in Tonga recognized it immediately and said, that's a problem. Simple example:
Mm.
Mhm.
tithes going to Europe and Australia, right? It's not just the economic loss. Yes, you could make an argument, oh, it's economic loss. The Tongan citizens are donating their 10% or whatever it is, and then that money goes outside. If you're looking at the very simple level, it's just a monetary problem. But if you're looking at a global understanding of power and influence,
Mm.
you understand that that losing of that influence
Mm.
is damaging to our ability to maintain our independence. And I think it is by design that if you do believe in an empire, which Masi and I prescribe to, it is by design, and it would be reasonable to expect if you were an empire, they say, hey, look, how do we keep people happy over long distances? We give them some power, but it must rotate between the islands, and that's a good thing. It keeps everybody a little piece of the pie, but it doesn't consolidate power into one family, kind of like what
Mm.
you were mentioning with the Fatongia, right?
Mm.
You're not going to consolidate power in just to one few families. You say, no, 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 no. If you are to consolidate, you're just going to consolidate as a totai, right? You can consolidate all this power if your family is in the fishing or navigation. You give them something that they can work towards to strive to, but you also boxed it in where it's not a quote unquote threat in the
Mm.
long term to the overall system. And so that's why I was interested to get your feedback, because I'm a believer that if you see a pattern, it's not by chance that these patterns happen. There's a reason. Kind of like what you mentioned in your thesis,
Mm.
there's a paradigm shift. Well, why? These paradigm shifts, sometimes they can happen naturally, but my experience in life is very few things happen just for the sake of happening. There's always a reason behind it, and you can understand it. Um, but yeah, that was just some of
Mm.
my thoughts on that. Not sure if anyone had additional thoughts to that, but I'm seeing a lot of patterns as that
Yeah.
you're sharing as you're discussing with all these different island groups and in your experience, Siaosi.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any thoughts from the group here. I have another question if we're done with that concept.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm done with it. I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next one, it's somewhat similar from your, and this is why it's really awesome to have you, because you have such a broad relationship and direct experience with many of these islands, Xiaoxi. The patriarchal versus the matriarchal concept of political and military power. Obviously, the Tu'i Tonga and Tonga in general, even with the Tu'i Kanokupolu, was more patriarchal. But you've mentioned in certain areas like Ha'amoa, they have the
Matriarchal.
female line with the matriarch. It looks like is there what's your kind of perspective on the outer any other islands where it's both patriarchal and matriarchal, or any patterns in that area on
Hmm.
patriarchal versus matriarchal influence in the Pacific? I've learned a lot today, and I have so many ideas that I'm going to be spending the next week thinking
Yep.
about over and over, revisiting certain ideas that I've had with some of the patterns that you've shared. I really appreciate your willingness to have a conversation. I've noticed that sometimes people are afraid to even have a conversation, and I'm like, this is how we
Move.
develop new
Yeah.
ideas. This is how we progress as a people. This is how we come together as a people.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to say is don't be afraid of conversations, because but you should be afraid when we're not having conversations. And people usually say, well, why, Tua? Because when there's no conversations, war is coming. So let's have conversations so we never have to get to war. But I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Shasi. Just like what Dualau mentioned, we appreciate your time. Appreciate your coming in, Shasi, because these are the conversations that helps us understand our history. To me, it's crazy. We're in 2024, and our Polynesian people still don't know just the basic foundation of just understanding our history. And this is kind of why we kind of just did this podcast, so we can just have a conversation, and then everyone just pick out what what ideas is out there, so we can have a a consensus of what what our history is. But we appreciate your time, Xiaoxi, and like what
Yeah.
Tua said, we appreciate the time and your ideas that you've provided, and hopefully our viewers will appreciate you having you on the Polynesian Eyes broadcast, because we did learn a lot, and we're just
Mhm.
grateful for the time that you've given given up to join us. And yeah, just appreciate it, Xiaoxi, and then just leave the closing remarks to you, Xiaoxi.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to thank you both for giving me this opportunity. And this is something that is central to my life, to share my knowledge, because I to research and gain knowledge from other people, so I have to give it back to any form of communication, like the podcast. And I hope that you can find more to develop this network, because in the future, this is what our Polynesian people need: a network that have all the answers, or to look for sources, and you record it and keep it for the future of our Pacific people. And I'm enjoying our time together, because Kaili and Mahina and I will always have the same thing like this when we dialogue and we put in ideas, and then we fight, mostly debating. But so I'm used to it, and I enjoy it.
Mm,
Even though our one was a more uh, uh, independent one, because we share our beliefs without knocking each other out like we do. But yeah, I'm just thankful for the opportunity.
Excellent.
Yeah.
yes, yes.
If you need me in the future, I'm open to more conversation. Mm.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
But thank you.
Absolutely. We'll end the show with what we always say, right, Masi?
Yes,
Don't be
sir.
afraid, stay curious, and ask the hard
The
questions.
hard questions.
That's what we invite our viewers. That's what we believe in. So until next time, peace.
Alo.